Hey everybody, welcome to this restoration of a blue Baldor grinder. This one's a model 623E, which means it has rear exhaust. You'll see that in just a second as we turn the corner. There you can see it right at the lower left of the screen behind the cord. This is a nice grinder. It was in good shape. You can see it's not rusted beyond measure, but the bearings are a little bit tired, so we're going to strip it apart. Put some new paint on there, get the bearings installed, change the cord plug at the end a little bit, and we should be in business. So this is going to be a fun project. I hope you stick around for it. We're going to take this down step by step. If you've got a Baldor grinder or any other sort of grinder, the steps are the same. Nice cast iron wheel guards over there. That's so rare today. So we're going to have a lot of fun with this one. So let's get started and start getting this guy apart. All right, well, one of the most important things of any of these sorts of projects is you got to get the wiring straightened out. So we've opened up the bottom of the thing. You can see here we've got some of the wires already marked. Baldor does a great job of marking this stuff off. What I'm looking at down there is a run capacitor. And I'm just tracing the wires from the stator, from the rotor to this thing. What I'm going to do is color code it all. So I'm going to take some enamel paint and red, green, yellow, and mark both sides of the wires where these guys are twisted together. So for instance, just getting the lay of the land, making sure I've got the right numbers there. So we've got the power cord coming in. You can see, again, we've got these yellow twist ends. And notice Baldor does a good job labeling these things. You have number 3, you have wire number C, letter C. So that's going to come in handy when we put this back together. Very important, document all this. Don't just do a video like that I'm doing. Notice there's number 4 there. Take some photos from every angle you can. You're going to need this when it comes time to put it together, especially if this takes a few weeks. Checking out the power cord. We've got the switch there. Notice behind we've got the power cord coming in. That's the green ground wire that's attached to the stator in the back there. And like I said, just taking a look, making sure I've got everything lined up here so there are no surprises. I'll be taking plenty of pictures, and again, I'm going to mark these things. The most important thing you can do is mark both ends of these wires where they're connected using some enamel paint. Yeah, there's the ground wire right there from the power cord. Very important. So do that, and you shouldn't have any trouble at all. Just document, and you'll be in business. So let's stop here for a second. Noticing also that the switch is vertical rather than horizontal, so on-off goes up, down instead of left-right. So let's continue. All right, let's start disassembly here. All right, the first thing to do is get the wheel guards off. So right now we're taking the outer wheel guard off. There's a couple of screws in there holding it on. Be careful when you remove these. They're cast iron, very heavy, relatively heavy, and you don't want them clanking it down onto the floor. Now what I like to do when I get the screws out, I'll take them and thread them right back where they were. The reason for that is if you hold it aside for a couple of weeks, if it's delayed for a bit, the odds of losing these screws if they're just laying around is exponentially higher than if you put them back where they were. That way you always know where they're at. All right, here we go. I'm taking off the nut that holds on the grinding wheels. Put that aside. We'll put that back on as soon as we can. And notice here on the shaft, the little nubbin that I'm pointing to, right there, that is a Baldor thing. Their wheel guards have slots in them where those fit over. That keeps the wheel guards from spinning in place, at high speed. So it's a pretty ingenious invention by Baldor. Invention's maybe not the right word. A nice innovation by Baldor. Which I don't see in a lot of other grinders. Right now, I'm taking off the inner wheel guard. There are 4 screws holding this in. I'm sorry the camera work isn't showing that as directly as I should have, and I've got the camera on my head at this point, so I'm just sort of winging it. So we'll take these off. Again, 4 screws, no big deal getting these off. I didn't have to use any penetrating fluid. You might. That's fine. No law says you can't. The important thing is don't force this. Don't go too hard where you wind up stripping the bolts, or the screws rather. And you should be fine. So again, 4 of these things, and when these come out, I'll thread them right back in where they were, just as with the outer wheel guard bolts. So we'll get this going in just a second. We'll pick up where we left off. Hold on just a moment. Okay, we got the inner wheel guard off. Now what I'm going to do is take the 4 bolts the 4 screws we undid, and put them right back where they were. Same idea as with the outer wheel guard, just thread them back into where they came from. That way there's almost no chance of losing them, especially if this project's sitting for a few weeks. We can always mask them off when it comes time for painting. Put a little masking tape on there. They won't be, they won't have any trouble. So we'll take care of that. So that shouldn't be any sort of problem. So that's always just a good practice. I've learned that the hard way. Maybe you have too. We'll get that done in just a sec. And then we'll move on. What we're going to do is then we'll tip this over, take the bottom off, and just take a look at the wiring again. I know we looked at it just a few seconds ago. We'll take another quick peek at the color coding I was talking about before. And so we'll jump onto that one next up. All right, here we go. So we're going to take the bottom off, couple of screws holding that in. Won't take long to get that off at all. And again, once we're done, again, same thing as before. Once we get those screws out, they're going to go right back where they were. And that had a little lock washer on it, as is the top one there. You might not be able to read this too easily, but on the bottom there, the previous owner, kindly enough, wrote down the specs of the Baldor grinder, what amperage it had, what the model number was, all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of interesting. All right, here we go. Again, we see the run capacitor at the bottom. That was in pretty good shape, so I'm going to keep using that. Now, meantime, we'll flip over here. We're going to start taking a look at the switch. We're going to take that out. I think I've got a 7/16 socket on there. It just unscrews very easily. Get that done. We'll get that thing out of the way in just a second. And once you do that, the switch can come threading out. And then we'll just start disassembling all the wiring there. Half a second while we take care of that. Again, just take your time on this stuff. No need to force it. Yeah. Once you get that little lock nut that holds all these switches in going, you can just undo it by hand, as I'm doing right there, and then it comes out really easily. Just slide right through the other end. There we go. Very nice. And again, what I like to do also, I'll just thread that little thing right back on where it came on the switch again. Same idea as before, just keep all this stuff together. Very little risk then of it, of these things walking away over time. Okay, here I'm just undoing the wire twists that hold these things together, the yellow wire twist. And I've also, like I mentioned before, I color-coded these wires. So notice here in just a sec as I get these wires undone, we'll take a quick example of that. Notice right there, got a little yellow bit on there. That is some paint I put on there on both ends of that wire that were twist tied together. That way when it comes time to, you see right there, yellow to yellow, I've got a red one right below next to it for another set of wires going together. Again, the idea of this is when we put it back together, red goes to red, yellow goes to yellow, green goes to green. No surprises, no unpleasant surprises, because otherwise you're sitting here going, what the heck did this thing do? And right here you notice I'm just disconnecting really quickly the ground wire from the power cord. So we'll take care of that one in just a sec. So that's great. So again, we're just disassembling everything. And we should be in business there as far as wiring goes. So we'll go on to the next step in just a moment. All right, I got a punch and I got a hammer. So what am I doing here? What I'm doing is when it comes time to put these two halves together, the stator and the sides, you want to know where they line up. So I'm putting what are known as witness marks here on both sides, one on the stator and one on the end bell there on the other side of it. I'll do this on both sides. I'll do a couple on each side just to make sure things are lined up. So you see those things? That means that's where those two halves come together. So when you put this all back together, you'll know how it lines up. Otherwise, you could have some tough times getting all the through-bolt holes lined up, all that sort of jazz. It's just not worth it. Get a punch, get a little hammer. We're doing the same thing on one side to the other. There we are. All right, next item on the list, we got to get these through bolts. Not a big deal. This one, these guys have one on the top and one on the bottom. So we're just going to pull those guys out. Some of their Baldor grinders have 4. This one's only got 2 because there's only 1/3 horsepower. Although it's got a good amount of amperage. These grinders, these Baldors, they're so much better than the stuff you get at Home Depot today. It's not even funny. Get this guy out, and then we'll take this top one out. We'll take out the bottom one. No surprise here. Then we're going to get out a little hammer and chisel, and we're going to take the end bells off in just a moment. So we'll get to that in half a second. All right, once you've got those through bolts out, just tap the end bells off as we're doing here. You can see the rotor coming out, the blue bit there in the middle. And then with the end bells, just check the washers. Make sure you know how many are going in there, fiber washers versus metal ones, and put them back in where they were. That way you're not surprised when you put it back together. Just document all this stuff. Not rocket science. Okay, once you've got the rotor out, you can start pulling the bearings off. You can see here I've got some bearing pullers. You can, if you don't have one of these things, you can go down to O'Reilly's or Pep Boys or any sort of auto parts store and rent these basically for free. Put your credit card down, bring it back in 48 hours, and you're all set. What you do with these things, if you haven't used these before, you basically put them on the shaft, put the arms around the bearing, and you start tightening it up, and that'll pull the bearings off. In this case, these bearings were on there pretty tight, actually. It took a few tries to get them off. They did come off in the end, so not a big deal. But sometimes you'll have more luck than others depending on how tight these things are on. So you notice I'm going from the closed end to an open end wrench, just trying to get my bearings on this. Yeah, this thing, of course, the mat gets in the way too. That never helps, does it? Then we come in here. Again, I'm trying everything I can to get the bearings off. Eventually they came off. I'll spare you all the gory details here as I'm pulling these things off. But just rest assured, get a bearing puller on there. Take your time. The first few turns are usually the toughest. After a second or so, after they start moving a little bit, you sort of crack the seal, and then the bearings will come off much smoother. So we'll skip through the rest of this and we'll go on to the next section. All right, we zipped through all that. Now let's talk about how we're going to get the new bearings on here. So we've got our hammer. That's about a 2-pound sledgehammer. We've got our rotor. We've got a piece of pipe with a cap on it that we're going to put the bearing. So we're going to put the bearing on the shaft and we're going to tap it on with that. And we're going to do that, using that. And we're going to put it against a block of soft wood. That way we don't mess up the shaft on the other end. You don't want to hammer this against concrete. You're going to ruin the threads if you do that. So you want to be extra careful. And yes, I've got that. That fits the inner race, the inner ring of the bearing. Make sure you only tap on that. Now, having done that, we put the bearing on. I heated the bearing up beforehand. You can put it on a light bulb for a couple of minutes on the inner race just to make sure it heats up and expands, makes the installation a little bit easier. Now you see I'm lining up that pipe with the cap and just tapping it. Notice the other end again is on that wood block. That way we're not pounding this into concrete. Give it some gentle taps. Again, that's a 2-pound hammer. This is going to go on eventually. Stop and check your work periodically. Notice I'm making sure I'm tapping against that inner ring on the bearing only. You want to make sure you do that. Don't tap against the bearings themselves. Otherwise, it's game over. And again, I'm using, by the way, name brand bearings. You want to do the same thing. Names like Nachi, NSK, SKF. Buy some good name brand bearings. You won't regret it. Only costs a few dollars more compared to cheap Chinese knockoffs. All right, so now, having done all the tapping, we got it all set. Just checking, make sure the fingers are okay. They are. That's good. Now just check, do a quick spin. Looks good. Bearings on there nice and tight. Pressed up against the shaft. No problems there. Again, just a little diligence and you'll be in good shape. No problem. We're all set now. We'll take care. We'll do the next bearing on the other side. I won't show that. And we'll move on to the next step. All right, so the next step we got to do is we got to get the rust and the crud and all that stuff off here. Get the paint off so that we're ready to go. So I put the headphones on, earmuffs. And we're going to get the angle grinder going here in just a second. What do I have on here? I've got a woven paint stripping disc on here. You can get them several places. I think I got mine in a place called Lehigh Valley Abrasives. These things are great for stripping paint but not damaging the metal. Much less corrosive on the metal or much easier on the metal than something like a flap disc with 60 grit sandpaper. So take a look at one of these things. They're pretty good. Now we won't go over the whole paint stripping process because next to watching paint dry, there's nothing more boring than watching paint getting stripped. But you get the idea here. Get this as clean as you can, especially things like that wheel guard you see on the left there. The exhaust port, a lot of crud and stuff builds up in there. So be sure you get that stuff out either with sandpaper, use it by hand, maybe get a Dremel with a wire wheel on there, something. That way, again, if you don't have a clean surface, the paint's not going to stick to it. So anyway, you guys have the idea here. We'll stop now, continue on to the next step, which is priming. But this takes a little bit of time, just an FYI. Don't get discouraged. Just go through, take your time on this. Again, all the prep work, that's the hard part here. The painting and priming, that doesn't take long at all, but you got to have a good base to start with. All right, now, if you don't have one of those paint stripping discs, not to worry. You can always use a wire wheel attached to an angle grinder, such as I've got here. These are much more common, easier to get at your local home improvement centers, Lowe's or Home Depot, wherever you want to go. And this will take the paint off as well. It also comes in handy for hitting tight corners and inside corners. In a minute, we'll start getting the crud and stuff out of the exhaust ports. If you're using one of those woven discs, they're great, but they're only really great on flat surfaces. The material on there can be pulled off. It gets knocked off if it's hitting sharp edges and things like that, and it loses its effectiveness. Wire wheels, of course, are much tougher in that regard, much easier to hit corners and edges without all the wires springing out. Not to say that some don't come off, and you want to make sure you're wearing eye protection when you do any of this stuff, of course, because it's no fun getting one of those things in your cornea. Now notice again, I'm hitting the back side of this, getting in, so see what I'm doing, I'm going inside the curves there. That's hard to do with the woven disc, and in just a sec, we'll go into the exhaust port, like right there. Notice wire wheels are great for that, getting those tight spots, and you do want to get the tight spots. You want to make sure you get all this stuff cleaned off as much as you can, otherwise the paint's just not going to stick. And over here on the side guard, we'll touch up the tool rest there. Get that nice and cleaned off. I don't think I'm going to paint the tool rest. Those things just get marked up as soon as you start sharpening drill bits or things like that. The paint comes right off, so there's no real point to that. But again, you can use, so what I'm trying to say is you can use one of these wire wheels if you don't have the woven discs handy. And these, again, the wire wheels are great for sharp edges, corners, and interior sections. All right, once you've got things cleaned up, it's time to start painting here. Right here, I'm using a 2K epoxy primer. This is actually designed for automotive use. I just had some laying around from a touch-up job I'd done. You can use Rust-Oleum primer, whatever works for you. Just right here, I had this stuff, and it is pretty good if you have a chance to get some. Also, I'm using a small minigun from a company called A&I, an Italian company. They do very nice spray guns that are fairly inexpensive. This is a detail gun. I probably paid, I don't know, $100 for it from a place called Spray Guns Direct in the UK. They actually are very good too. Great stuff. You might want to take a look at them sometime. And surprisingly inexpensive shipping too. And it comes in very quickly. Very, very much recommended company. Meantime, just notice how I'm spraying inside and out using this primer. Light coats is the key. Going on that, I'll do about 3 or 4 coats. Don't want to go on heavy either this way or on the paint stage or on the clear coat stage. Just light coats, let it dry, give it 5 minutes between coats, and you should be in business. And again, I'm just touching up everything, or I'll just flip this over in a second. Here I've got some welding wire there to move it around with so I don't wind up touching it and smudging it with my fingers. And again, just going very light here. Nice and easy. And like I say, about 3 coats of this stuff, you get full coverage. Don't worry about getting full coverage on the first coat. You'll see some bleed through and all that. That's perfectly fine, perfectly normal. That means you're not overloading it, so that's actually a good sign. Again, about 3 or 4 coats, probably 3 coats should be fine. All right, next up is the paint. Again, same idea as with the primer. 2, 3, 4 coats should give you full coverage. Don't go for full coverage on the first coat again, because you're just going to wind up overloading it and the paint's going to sag. Right here I'm using a single-stage urethane paint. I believe I got this at Summit Racing. This is, what color paint was this thing again? I think just, oh yeah, I know. I had some Pacific Blue paint when I used for painting a truck not too long ago. And this is some leftover. Again, you could use, if you don't have access to this equipment again, just use some spray-on Rust-Oleum. That's fine. Same principles apply. Notice I'm trying to hit every nook and cranny right here. Again, doing light coats. I'm going to stop on the base in just a second and move on to the other parts. But again, just I'm misting it on here. I'm not trying to get full coverage in one go. Just as an FYI, the single-stage urethane is very, very scratch-resistant paint. They sell this stuff in quarts. I think it's about $20, $25 a quart, which is a little bit pricey, not that bad. You do have to buy activator also, which is another $15 or maybe $10, so about $35 for 1 1/4 quarts of sprayable material, which again seems like a bit, but it does go a long way. And again, it's very, very scratch resistant. If you've never used it before, single-stage urethane, much more scratch resistant than your oil-based paints, your Rust-Oleums and such. Which again, nothing wrong with using those. Just if you want to take it to the next level, try that. Now here I'm spraying the insides of one of the end bells. We're going to do clear coat also, but the single stage is a great starting point here. Notice I'm getting in there. Mostly, I'm not going to clear coat the inside of these things because no one's going to see it, but it's good to put some paint on there just to keep corrosion away and to stop the rusting. And again, we're just misting it right here. One bit there, just light strokes. You guys get the idea at this point. Nothing more to say about that. Just again, 2 or 3 coats. You should have full coverage and you should be good to go. All right, last but not least, we got the clear coat. This is also a Summit Racing product, I believe, just a regular high solids clear. Again, also about $25 per quart, a little less per gallon, maybe even less than that per quart, I'm not sure. You don't have to do this. Clear coating just gives you another level of gloss and scratch resistance. And since I was doing all this and I had this stuff laying around, I figured why not. You can also get clear coat in spray cans. Something called Spray Max is a very good product. Also about $20 a can. You might want to look into that if you want to do that. If you're spraying anything like Rust-Oleum, you're going to want to wait at least a few days before you clear coat. Otherwise, you run the risk of the paint not gassing off properly before you spray. So do wait several days at least, maybe even a week or 2, whatever. Just make sure that paint is dry before you do any clear coating. All right, when you're done, look at this. You have a nice, glossy, tough as nails finish. Just look at that gloss. That clear coat really makes a difference. If you have the opportunity to use it, if you have some clear coat, by all means, go for it. So we've got something that's great here. You want to wait, before you start putting this together, wait a couple of days just to make sure the paint's all dry and the clear coat as well. But look at that finish. Just really nice. And the best part, it's both glossy and just tough as nails, scratch resistant, corrosion resistant, the whole thing. It's going to come together really nicely. I can't wait to do it and show you guys. All right, paint's dry. Let's put this sucker together. I'm going to get our rotor in there. Got to make sure you get the alignment straight. Notice when I was pointing there just a second ago, those pins on the right, those were on the right-hand side before. Now it's just a matter of putting the washers in. Again, keep track of all the washers when you take this thing apart so you know what to put in. Notice I'm putting one of the washers in right there. Putting the rotor in the way it came out, so with those fins on the right-hand side. And we slide that thing through the stator like so. Nice and easy. Get that guy in there like that. Notice too, I'm lining up those witness marks I pounded in before when I took this thing apart, so I know where to align them, right there where I was pointing. Just making sure that you got that lined up so that the bolts can go through the holes there. Taking out a piece of tape from one. Getting that threaded rod there. Getting out the other end bell, putting that thing on. Again, that's also got a washer in there. I'm being careful installing it. That's why. Don't want the washer to fall out. Nice and easy. Slap those guys together. Again, turn that as well. Make sure the witness marks are lined up. And, of course, the bolt holes so that the end bolts can go through one side to the other. Take care of all that. Just nice and easy. No need to rush any of this stuff. All right, next up we'll see if we can slide these suckers through. There's always a little catch at some point. You never quite line it up. Notice right there the first time. That's fine. Putting those things in. Now the whole point of this threaded rod, these aren't the actual bolts, of course, so they're too long. But I'm doing that just so I get this lined up. So when I start tapping the two end bells together, they're lined up. Otherwise, you run the risk of tapping together, figuring out, oh wait, dang it, these bolts aren't going to fit, so you have to undo it. It's not fun. So get a little threaded rod, put it through like that. Make sure it's obviously smaller than the holes themselves so it can slide through properly. And this way you've got alignment marks. Isn't this great? So you put those things together, and then we're going to take our mallet and start tapping things on. All right, great. We've got things lined up. Now we're taking a dead blow hammer and just tapping those end bells into position. Again, this will take a little bit of going back and forth. Nice and easy. Notice I'm not hammering away like a maniac. Nice taps. Always use a soft blow hammer when you're putting this stuff together. Otherwise, the paint's going to come right off. So you notice I've got that one there. That's some sort of plastic-faced hammer. I can't remember exactly what the material is on that, but nothing too hard-faced. Notice on the right, I've got a genuine dead blow hammer in case I really need to get some taps. So we're putting that thing in. The rotor spins nice, so I think we've got things lined up. So I guess we'll continue in just a sec. We can take out that threaded rod as soon as we finish tapping on, and then we'll button this thing right up. All right, we took out the threaded rod. Now we put in the actual rods, the actual bolts, and now we're just tightening things up. Taking care of that, making sure it's all good and set to go. Start it off by hand and just finish off with a ratchet. And again, always check to make sure that things spin freely. If you notice any binding, that's a problem. Right here, things are spinning freely. Nice and back and forth, that's great. We're ready to go on to the next step. All right, next up we're going to do the wheel guards. So right now I'm putting on the inner guard on the right-hand side, as you can see. Notice also, I'm not sure this is obvious, but I didn't clear coat the inside of the wheel guards. There's no real reason to. Cosmetically, you're never going to see it. And plus, the insides of the wheel guard is going to get scuffed up anyway, whether you're using a wire wheel or even a buffing wheel or a grinding wheel. If you're going to get dirt and grime and scratches in there anyway, I just painted the inside just to keep corrosion and rust away. Again, there's no reason to put clear coat on there. You're never going to see it, so why waste the material? And you see right here, I'm lining up the 4 bolts. This side, when I bought the grinder, this one didn't actually have a wheel on it or any flanges. So all I'm going to do is put this inner guard on, then put the outer guard on. Then we'll go to the other side, which does have a grinding wheel and some flanges, and we'll show how to install that in just a moment. All right, we're working on the left-hand side now. I want to mention something here that I've mentioned before. The rotors have little nubbins on them at the ends with these flanges, such as I'm putting on right here, slot onto. It's pretty ingenious design, I think, by Baldor. It holds the flanges in place. That way, when the rotor's going at 3,600 RPM, there's no risk of the wheel spinning in place. It'll actually move along because there is a slot there that holds everything in place. All right, so we've just done a test fitting. Now we're going to put on the inner guard, just like we did before. Notice also no clear coat on the inside of this. No reason to do it because you're not going to see it, and it's just going to get scratched up anyway as you're using a wire wheel or using a grinding wheel or even a buffing wheel. So we're going to line that up again. 4 bolts there, no big deal. We'll do that. We'll put the flanges on with the grinding wheel, put on the outer guard, and then we should be in business. Also, I already wired up the plug here. I didn't show that because there's really a no-brainer thing. You recall in the beginning of the video, I marked all the wires. I made mention of how Baldor lists the wires. They have labels on them already for you, which is great.
So all I do is just take a bunch of photos showing, for instance, where wire A from the grinder goes into the plug. Where does, which, you get the idea, that where the capacitors go in, where the wiring goes on that. If you take a bunch of photos, you should have no trouble replicating that when you put the new power cord in, just like I did right here. All right, well, rather than watch all this getting buttoned up, we'll skip ahead to the end where we fire this sucker up and enjoy the fruits of our labor. Stick around. All right, we're in the home stretch here. Everything's buttoned up, power cord's in, wheel guards are on, tool rests are in place. Look at that nice shine. Unfortunately, it's a little bit overcast today, so the gloss isn't quite as shiny as it could be, but take my word for it. Look at all that good stuff right there. Nice deal. All right, we're going to fire this sucker up in just a sec, see how she sounds. Here we go.
2, 1. There we go.
There we are. Sounds great. Runs fine. Thanks so much for joining me on this. Subscribe if you like. I'm going to be doing other restorations, including a block grinder from Craftsman soon. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it helps you with your own restorations. And thanks again for sticking with me on this. Have a great one.